I sue hospitals and, so I'm suing people that save lives for a living, right? And so if you've got 150 potential jurors sitting in a courtroom, you've got to really kind of read people quickly, because the bias effect, I think, is a little bit more intense than it would be in a typical garden variety PI case because of the people I'm hauling into court, right? People love doctors, people love nurses. Picking a jury to me is showtime. It's the most important part of what we as trial lawyers do. And that's what I get most excited about, and I pour myself the most intensely into. You can have a great case and you get a bad jury, you're in trouble.
Howdy, and welcome to the show. Cooper's Code focuses on legal issues and notable practitioners, distilling wisdom so we all achieve the best results for our clients. I'm Miles Cooper, and I'm very excited for this conversation with the iconic Jeff Mitchell of Mitchell Leeds LLP. California's 2 largest medical malpractice verdicts, his. Record verdicts in 3 counties, also his. But the real measure isn't the verdicts. It's what they represent for the families who trusted him with the cases that forever changed their lives. Mitchell's peers have taken notice, earning him Trial Lawyer of the Year from the San Francisco Trial Lawyers Association. In a profession where most attorneys handle a few major cases in their careers, Mitchell has tried and resolved approximately $500 million in malpractice claims. In our conversation, we discuss courtroom moments, his path to success, and the wisdom he's learned along the way. So sit back and enjoy this wide-ranging conversation with the iconic Jeff Mitchell. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Miles.
In conversations like this, I usually like to start a little bit with how you found yourself in the law in the first place.
It's quite a story. I grew up in in Long Beach, which is the biggest suburb in Los Angeles County. My father was an auto body painter, so he was kind of grew up around primer and lacquer and all that, and so he was a high school dropout. Kind of hitchhiked from Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, to Pasadena when he was 14. Got a job, went to high school for a year or so, got a job building circuit breakers at the Jet Propulsion Lab. Met my mother on the beach, I think. My mom's from Long Beach. Neither of them were educated. No one in my extended family really was. Actually, I think I was the first person in my extended family to go to college. I was kind of a fairly intelligent but poor high school student. I was very good at the stuff that I liked.
Did you go to high school in Long Beach then?
Yeah. And so I was good at the stuff I liked and horrible at the stuff that I didn't. I wouldn't go to class. But I knew I was bright. I had a good memory. I remember that. I was a jock, so I played every sport I could possibly play.
What sports?
Wrestling, football, and track. I wrestled from first grade all the way through high school. I spent a number of years in South Lake Tahoe. There was kind of a point in my childhood that my parents got a wild hair and moved to Tahoe for some unknown reason. It's not the best place in the world to be an auto body painter when it's too cold and snows for half the year. I moved back down south. When I got out of high school, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. Kind of went to Cal State and flitted around at Long Beach City College and then back to Cal State. And I was still living at home. I think I was 19, and my parents were just a mess. They were, both pretty addicted to different drugs. They didn't set a good example. Are
they still around?
Yes.
Okay.
And I remember just walking in the room one day, and I thought, I do not want to be like them. We never went on vacation. They never motivated my brother and sister and I to do anything. And I just remember one day thinking, I have to get out of here. And I suddenly, when I got to college, I realized I liked school. And maybe because I was a late bloomer, I don't really know. But I moved out, got an apartment. I waited tables all the way through college. Did quite well. I loved it. Got great grades. Really fell in love with school and learning. I read voraciously. But I still didn't know what I wanted to do after college. Thought about becoming a cop, actually. If you could imagine me as a cop, it'd be frightening. But
I can imagine you as a cop.
Yeah. So I remember applying to the CHP Academy, getting in, and then realizing that I had to move to Sacramento for 6 or 9 months. And no offense to my dear friends in Sacramento, but I didn't want to go there. So I got out of school. I toyed with the idea of going into sales, and in fact, got a job selling wine for a while. So I got sent to France for several months and learned the wine business, which was quite interesting. It was like going to chemistry class and geography and history all at the same time. I worked in that field for a little bit. Then I thought about getting a PhD, political science and philosophy. I have two bachelor's degrees, but I think I wanted to get a PhD in philosophy, actually. And I loved studying the philosophy of language. So like Ludwig Wittgenstein and Bertrand Russell and Heidegger and Kant and all this. I don't know why I was so into it, but I thought about getting a PhD in philosophy. And I remember talking to one of my college professors that I'd written a senior thesis for. And he said, don't waste your time getting a PhD. No one in the world cares about what you write, especially in philosophy. I kind of looking back on it, I disagree, but he said, go to law school. You can do whatever you want. So I applied to law school, and that's kind of how I got in and started rolling.
There are a few things you said that I want to follow up on. There's some common threads that I see with some of the more brilliant trial lawyers, and that is sometimes what I would describe as a rough background or a background where the parents definitely didn't have means, and so a striver mentality. Mm-hmm. And also work in the service industry.
Sure.
How do you feel those informed your progress, if at all?
I think both of them did. I think that I've done pretty well as a lawyer because I'm actually a really hard worker. And my parents were not. I had grandparents that were very influential in my life, my maternal grandparents, and particularly my grandmother, who was my best friend, and my grandfather, who worked died on the phone at 86 years old working.
Wow.
And so I got a lot of that drive, I think, from them, kind of indirectly. And my younger brother's 2 years younger. He's a very hard worker. So there must have been something there. In the service industry, I mean, I worked at a restaurant for 4.5 years in college. I worked darn near full time. It was kind of like a Marie Callender's kind of place that was kind of very ubiquitous around the LA suburbs. And I loved it. I worked breakfast. I worked dinner. I'd see a lot of the people that were the primary customer base there were elderly because it was next to a large, kind of a little city called Leisure World in Seal Beach. And probably half the people the patrons that came in there were elderly. And so they would come in and want to talk. And I enjoyed every bit of it. All I did in college was go to school and work. I wasn't in a fraternity. I didn't party much. I didn't have time. But that, you learn how to really relate to people. I mean, if you can wait tables at a fast-paced restaurant that serves breakfast on the weekends, you can stand in front of a jury all day long, think on your feet, read the room. So, I mean, that sort of stuff really informs a lot of how I think, acted and done things in my life and my career. I always tell people I'd be a great server now. If the law didn't work out, I could run down to Boulevard or Kokari or House of Prime Rib and be perfectly content, and I'd probably love it.
On that front, and we're getting ahead of ourselves, but I think it's an appropriate time to go into it. You talk about reading the room, and I think of one of your many talents being in jury selection and being able to evaluate who may be a right fit and who may not be. It's not a question. It's in essence an opportunity to unpack that in terms of your experience in reading the room in the service and how that informed your approach to jury selection.
Yeah, I think they're directly related. When you're coming up to a customer waiting on them and their family, in a second, if you're busy, you've got to figure out what their particular desires may be, how they may treat you, how they may treat other people. And, I've always felt, and others do, I think, I'm very good at picking juries. I think it's the most important part of what we as trial lawyers do. If you can have a great case and you get a bad jury, you're in trouble. And so, when I go to pick, when I used to work at night on a busy night and I was in charge of 8 other food servers, which I was, it was like showtime. It's, when you got a 2-hour wait on a Friday night and you've got to manage all these complex personalities and figure out who can do what to who and how and when. And, you don't want things to go off the rails. I mean, that's when I try cases now, it's picking a jury to me is showtime. And that's what I get most excited about. And I pour myself the most intensely into, other than cross. To me, they're the most important parts of trying a case successfully. And particularly, in reading a room, I sue hospitals. And, so I'm suing people that save lives for a living, right? And so if you've got 150 potential jurors sitting in a courtroom, you've got to really kind of read people quickly, because the bias effect, I think, is a little bit more intense than it would be in a typical garden variety PI case, just because I think we tend to see more intense and kind of adhered to biases because of the people I'm hauling into court, right? People love doctors, people love nurses. So you really have to, having that background where I was just dealing with people all day long, every day, in a kind of a fast-paced environment where, people get cranky when their breakfast doesn't come in 15 minutes, right? Yeah. So people need their coffee. You need to know how to kind of cut through all that and you're trying to make a tip. You're living on tips. So you're trying to figure out how to impress those people that you've just met, often for the first time. So I think that served me quite well.
I normally go through in a semi-chronologic fashion. I'd love to go into jury selection right now. And to get there, I think we need to talk a little bit about some of the cases you've tried, and by that particularly locations. And so I'm just going to hit the high points of what I recall. I remember you trying a case up in Shasta not once but twice,
right?
And I think getting a great verdict the first time and getting an even better verdict the second time, if memory serves, and as well as a huge case in Fresno. I bring these forward because not only are you suing doctors and nurses and hospitals who are sometimes the largest employer where you're at, you're also doing it in what people think of as traditionally red state or bad locations for plaintiffs.
Sure.
So with that as backdrop, I'd love for you to go into some of the considerations and some of the tools that you've used in working with jurors who some of on the plaintiff side feel are worse jurors for plaintiffs.
Yeah, I've never really been afraid to go to tough jurisdictions. I'm generally of the philosophy, if you have a good case, you can win it basically anywhere. Now, you can lose a good case in great places, as we all know. But those kind of jurisdictions, you have to have a little something extra other than, standard of care was breached and they're going to dispute that. You have to have a little extra additive, I like to say, like you have to have defendants that are pointing the fingers at one another, things like that. Those cases had a lot of that. You have to have people that you're dealing with on the other side that may not be telling the truth. You may have to have people on the other side that are taking ridiculous positions. And so in all those cases, there was another case I got a pretty big verdict on more than a decade ago. It was in San Jose. I was suing Palo Alto Medical Foundation in Stanford. Well, 90% of those jurors are patients of those institutions. So you have to really, when you have cases like those in those kinds of jurisdictions, you have to really personalize the case, and you want the jurors to kind of know early on, man, I don't want this to happen to me. Mm-hmm. I don't care if you're in Redding or downtown Los Angeles or Fresno or Oakland. If you create an environment during jury selection where the potential jurors, by the time they're sworn in, already take that case seriously, you've kind of diffused a lot of that inherent kind of jurisdictional, cultural, maybe political bias, industrial bias. And so what I really try to do in every case, but it's particularly important in those kinds of places, you want the jurors to really take you and your case seriously So they know this isn't some meritless case, BS case. They know there's severe injuries. They know it's a tragic case. You try to, during voir dire, get the defense lawyer to buy into it, which I really try to do. Or I try to get the defense lawyers to tell the jurors, hey, this is a serious case. This isn't some BS case. We have disagreements, but this is a tragic, terrible case. So once you set the table like that, that kind of neutralizes a lot of those biases.
The common thread, I think, in jury selection that is talked about is whether you are selecting a jury or deselecting a jury. Do you have a view on that?
I try to do both because sometimes, I'm primarily of the camp. You're trying to select a jury. I leave doctors on my juries. I've left lawyers on my juries. I've left a lot of nurses on my juries. But you're obviously looking for people that, we get them all the time that, I'll get doctors that are just hell-bent on, they're not going to give you a dime no matter what. And so I try to use those kinds of jurors. I try to kind of run with that and make them, you almost kind of cross-examine them in front of the rest of the jury to make that position sound outlandish, where, you ask questions like, well, so you're telling me if your spouse, some physician or nurse committed malpractice and caused them serious injury, you're telling me and these other jurors that even under those circumstances, you're never going to find against a healthcare provider. So you're doing a lot of different things at once. It's a little bit different when you're doing malpractice cases. It just is. And everybody interfaces with the healthcare system. So there's always a lot of ground to cover because we all go to the doctor. We all deal with hospitals. We've all known people that are sick. So it's, it's fascinating because it crosses every aspect of every juror's life. So there's a lot to cover.
Do you use a jury consultant when you do this?
I do not. I don't think there's a right way or wrong way. I don't think I could never criticize another trial lawyer for using jury consultants. And I think that if you're a good trial lawyer, you should be able to, personally, I know a good juror when I see one in one of my cases. Do I know everything? No, I've lost cases I should have won. I've had jurors I thought would be great. They weren't. But I personally don't. I just think there's many ways to skin a cat. And plus I have a partner that we try every case together. So it's like having another jury consultant sitting there with me. I trust him, because I know him so well and he knows me so well and knows the case so well. I think that's, if not equally valuable, it could be more valuable than having a jury consultant with you. But I'm not critical of anybody who would use them.
What about questionnaires? Do you like
them?
them?
We love them. The problem we run into is, and I know all these defense lawyers so well, obviously, their general knee-jerk reaction is, if Mitchell wants it, I don't. But we love them. And usually if we get them, a lot of judges don't want to hassle with them. The smart judges know they save time. And, so we try to get stuff highly tailored to the case. We can't do it. We tend to get a vanilla questionnaire. Most judges do that now. But I do think they're valuable.
Do you do any focus group work before?
Yes, we do here and there. I think with focus groups, the hard part is the outcome is only as good as what you put into it. So if you've got an incredibly complex malpractice case, it's going to take 8 to 10 to 12 weeks to try with 25 retained experts, and it can be complex and a lot of literature being fought over. It's hard to really compress all that into a focus group. With that being said, if there's certain themes you want to test out, certain theories and defenses, you want to get a global kind of 35,000 foot, drone-like look at it, they're very valuable. You can do them efficiently and fairly inexpensively, and we've done them. I wouldn't say we do them in every case, but there's certain cases they call for it.
In the jurisdictions that you've been in that again, some of us plaintiffs lawyers would consider to be tougher jurisdictions, do you find that you're able to get more people off for a cause because of preconceived biases, or is it pretty much the same wherever you are?
I think it's pretty similar. It's the art in those jurisdictions that are finding the jurors that really are going to be biased against you, but, there's those silent jurors that, they're smart enough to try to find a way to get on there and not help your case very much. So that's the real art in those jurisdictions, because you see a lot more of those kinds of people in those jurisdictions that know how to play the game. And so, but I don't see there's like a statistically significant difference in the outright, overtly biased jurors from jurisdiction to one jurisdiction to the other. You see there's a higher number of sneaky jurors in those jurisdictions.
Are there any, whether I would call them secrets or special things that you have done that you bring to the table that you feel are different than what other lawyers do that you've seen or heard about that make it so that you're better able to intuit who might be a good or a bad juror?
I think what I really try to do, and I did this more when I was younger. I was always much younger than all the defense lawyers I was trying cases against. They were kind of people, your stereotypical old white guy with a lot of gray hair, and I'm this young guy, not anymore, as we can tell. But, I really tried to build my own credibility during voir dire, right? Where, okay, when I'm younger, I'm not just some punk kid that fell off the turnip truck yesterday. I try to invite the jurors to think I'm credible. I try to get jurors, and I really do this now a lot. I really try to get through how serious of a case it is to everybody involved, to the physicians, how much everybody's gone through on both sides of the table, and how, because most of the cases I'm trying are into the 8 figures, mostly with children, severe brain damage, multiple amputations, that kind of stuff. So I really, 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 really try more than other people I've seen. And I'm not critical of anybody else. I really think it's important in my cases to really build credibility more, not so much of myself anymore, but of my clients and the case they have. Because, I spend a lot of time in voir dire talking about how much money they're going to hear about and how expensive it is to care for these kinds of people. So that way, if you see people in the box and their eyes get blown out when they see those or hear those kinds of numbers, I'm watching all that, and it's not always verbal. It's always, a lot of it's, you can see somebody get squeamish and they go, whoa, so I really, really emphasize that when I pick juries, is building credibility of the case where they take it seriously from the minute they're sworn in.
That moment when the judge turns and says, "Mr. Mitchell, you may voir dire the jury," do you have any fear or anxiety at that moment, given how far you are in your career now?
Zero.
Was that always the case?
Yes. I think a lot of that is I like people. I think I'm a little bit of a showman, as we all know. I tend to be a gunslinger. I'm very intuitive. So I get like energized. It's almost like, I get a lot more nervous playing golf than I do. And I play a lot. I get energized by getting up there in front of people. I get nervous when the jury's out.
Okay.
Almost to a fault. I drive everybody insane. So it's strange, but then you sit there and you poured your guts into a case and you want the best for your clients. I am completely a train wreck when the jury goes out. I drive everybody nuts. I pace all over streets. I call everybody I know, but being there in front of them, none. I think it's the anxiety. I have anxiety awaiting the outcome.
That makes sense.
As we all do.
Yes. Yeah.
I think I do more than most.
Have you learned any tools to help you better moderate that? Or is it the same as it was when you first started?
I think, frankly, when I was younger, I'd drink a lot. And I wasn't the only one, but we would, kind of assuage all that anxiety with alcohol. The older I've gotten, I just call people on the phone and try to talk things through and try to learn about what I did or didn't do. So I'm one of those people, it's like if your listeners and viewers watch football, the head coaches are down in the field and they've got headsets and they're constantly talking. They're talking to the people up in the booth, just talking through things, because a lot of those people are not calling plays. They've got staff that are calling plays. They're talking through things with them to try to anticipate, learn, autocorrect, strategize. So that's kind of how I deal with it now, is just talking to people. And it's great because I have a partner. I love talking to him, and we talk every day about everything. So I have him, and so he and I are on the headset.
Well, so let's go down that path then in terms of how you work with the team globally. You're not in trial every day.
No.
About how often a year are you in trial these days?
Once every year and a half, 2 years. And it's typically when the other side's misevaluated the case. I mean, we vet the hell out of these cases. And for it to get to trial, somebody's probably made a mistake on the other side, frankly. And so it doesn't happen as often. And I think that's a function of how well we vet cases, frankly.
So in the time in between when you say you talk with your partner, your team on a daily basis, how do you strategize? How do you work on cases to help make sure that the other side sees the light?
The way the firm's set up now, we've got a pretty robust operation, a lot of staff. We've really staffed up. We've gotten a lot bigger. I tend to look at everything at 35,000 feet. I'm the one kind of looking at, I kind of focus on the bigger cases. I'm just making sure I'm trying to land the planes. I'm kind of trying to get the right experts together. I'm trying to kind of mentor the younger lawyers, trying to prioritize certain things over others. And then, on some of those larger cases, I'm the one that is dealing with the people writing the checks, frankly. Not that they won't talk to other people in my office, but, there's a certain comfort level when you've been dealing with the same people for 25, 30 years on these exact kind of cases. So I'm the one that's interfacing, trying to make sure they have what they need to get the reserves together they need or to posture the case in a certain way. So I'm really focusing. I always say I'm like an air traffic controller trying to get a big plane in the air and not crash it and land it and everybody gets off the plane. That's kind of where I look at my role now. And then if, the case goes to trial, then we'll try it together as a team. And, I'm still, even at that level, I might be picking the jury and cross-examining a bunch of experts and closing, some combination thereof, but I'm still looking at 35,000 feet down. And I think that's a function of, I've been doing it a long time. A lot of it is I'm not a real big detail person. I can when I have to, but that's just not, my brain doesn't work like that. I'm kind of more of I'm kind of a lot like you. I'm more of kind of a global, I just see the world that way. And so it's great. I've got a team and I've got a partner who's incredible at detail. And so that's why it works so well as a group.
When you talk about being involved in jury selection and cross-examinations, it prompts the question for me, what does your cross look like? Is your cross? Is your cross polite? How do you approach a witness?
I was taught very young, as a young malpractice defense lawyer, you win your cases and depositions, expert depos. And the way you do that is you go after people, not in a unprofessional way, but I'm not there to get information. I know the case. I know the medicine. I'm trying to get concessions and admissions that I can stand up in front of a jury in opening statement and say their expert's going to say A, B, C, and D. And that I have the same approach in trial. I am there trying to dismantle their defense at every possible juncture. So in other words, I ask very direct, precise questions. And, and I am able to do that because I'm asking those very same questions in a deposition. I'm not one of those lawyers that says, tell me your opinions and the basis of your opinions, and I leave. I will sit there for 6, 7, 8 hours until you give me what I want. Having the right cases lends itself to that approach. If you've got a cruddy case, it's harder to do. But if you have a good case and if the witness isn't completely off the rocker, you're going to get a lot you can use. So if you get it in a deposition, it's a lot easier. It's much easier to get it at trial. And, in jurors, I've found when I really fervently cross-examine an expert, they get up on the edge of their seat the next time another one hits a stand. It's almost, they like the show. They like that kind of aha Perry Mason moment. And I try to keep them engaged, and I'm trying to, by doing that, bringing them with me where they're going, yeah, why do you think that? I mean, that's ridiculous. So I'm pretty aggressive. And I think part of it is I really don't like it when people are BSing me or anybody else. I tend to be a very blunt, direct person. And I really don't like when people are beating around the bush. And I try to get jurors to come along on that journey with me.
Are you politely aggressive or aggressively aggressive?
I think I generally tend to be polite and somewhat humorous, but sometimes when I'm mad, I get hot. And most of the time it's worked. Sometimes I'm sure it hasn't, but I kind of can't help myself. When somebody's BSing me, I'm going to get hot. But I've had, I tried a case 2 or 3 years ago. One of the experts against me was probably the finest in the world in this little particular nerd world we were talking about. And he was so smart and so charming. I kind of laughed along with him and tried to take I said, well, I'm not going to make the jury hate me. So I was aggressive, but in a humorous way. So that's, once again, reading the room, reading the witness. Some witnesses you can get away with being very aggressive. Other witnesses you can't. And so you have to know the difference. So it's worked well, but you have to be able to read that room and read that witness.
One of the things I remember Bill Veen saying to me is you can't hate them before the jury hates them. And if you do, then the jury will not come with you.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
Going back to law school, we tangented down jury selection, did a lot of trial stuff. Where did you go to law school? What did you like about it?
Yeah, I went to California Western School of Law. It's downtown San Diego. It's kind of an old private independent, not university related, just been around forever. And it kind of manufactures the bench and bar in San Diego. It's a nice little regional law school. And I went there because I loved San Diego, liked the school. I loved law school because it was the first time in my life I didn't have to work my butt off. I borrowed money. So to me, that was my college experience. I was living in La Jolla, and I had a young wife that was in graduate school at the time, and I had no money. And loved every minute of it. I had no idea what kind of law I wanted to go into, or if I, in fact, would go into the law. But I loved every minute of it. It was funny, is the subject in law school that I thought I just didn't like it. And in fact, I think it was the worst grade I got was torts. And I'm a tort lawyer. And I remember really, really loving anything related to constitutional law, whether it was con law or criminal procedure. A lot of it's, constitutional in nature. Some of the evidence. I kind of was going back to college where I thought, God, I love history and politics and that kind of thing. So I enjoyed it. I got into reading a lot of like law and literature, and I had a professor that taught a class called Law and Literature, and I loved him. I had him for criminal procedure, and he was kind of this esoteric academic Oberlin College guy. And I remember just sitting there talking to him, and I'd play golf with him. And I became kind of a closet intellectual, even though I'm not. So I loved every bit of it. Had no idea what I wanted to do, but I loved it.
With the interest that you now have in trial and that engagement with people, did being a DA or a public defender ever call to you?
So I have a friend from law school. He was a couple years ahead of me. He's now he's a presiding judge of the Torrance branch of the LA County Superior Court. And I don't remember how we met, but I think we probably met there. He was a couple of years ahead of me. He was a guy named Alan Honeycutt, very fine man, fine judge. And he was from the same neck of the woods as I was. And he said, hey, I'm going to get hired as a deputy city attorney. You want my clerk job that I had in law school, and I can hook you up. And I went in there and they hired me. I was working at the Redondo Beach City Attorney's Office. And I got a job there. And the first year they had me holed up in the law library writing memos for city council members. But then the second and third years, they had me in court. And so they used to have, and I don't know if they do anymore, a state bar program where you can try cases and argue in court under the supervision of licensed lawyers. So they threw me in court. I was trying, DUI cases and possession of stolen property cases and random misdemeanors. And it was one of those There's a couple cities in LA County that had their own city prosecutor's office. And it was Manhattan Beach and Redondo. They wouldn't farm everything to the DA's office. So, and I was in fact trying felony cases. We used to call them wobblers, 17Bs. And I was doing evidence suppression motions, and I handled an arraignment calendar every Monday by myself, and I loved it. And so when I was in law school, by the time I got out, I'd probably tried 10, 15 cases and countless 1538.5s, which are evidence suppression motions and arraignments. And I was around a lot of lawyers. And, I learned how to negotiate. I'm dealing with defense lawyers trying to cut deals for their clients on criminal cases. So I really fell in love with the courtroom. I didn't know I'd like it as much as I did until I got there. And so when I got out, I was offered a job as a deputy city attorney, but then they had a financial issue with the city, but there was an oil subsidence issue. So I was out of a job, and the rest is history.
Does the name Dr. Goddard mean anything to you?
Well, no, it was a guy named Jerry Goddard,
Yep.
was the city attorney of the city of Redondo Beach.
He was a teacher at my Redondo High.
Yeah, he was a teacher. So I worked for Jerry Goddard. I think he was a cop at one point.
Yeah. Volunteer sheriff with
LA County.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I think he was the principal of Redondo Union High, and then he was elected city attorney.
Yeah.
So I remember sitting in his office being interviewed by him in 1994, something. He was kind of an imposing law and order figure, but I loved him, and Alan kind of was cut from that cloth, and I don't know if he's still alive, but yeah, I knew Jerry for a long, long time.
Small world.
Small world indeed.
So we talked a little bit about how much you liked that criminal side of things, and yet here you are now as a medical malpractice. I'll call you a prosecutor. Where did you end up going after law school that then kind of ultimately landed you here?
Yeah, so it's circuitous since I was out of a job. So it wasn't like I went to Bolt or Stanford or something. And I didn't know a lot of lawyers. But my best friend from law school, his father was kind of the old part of that old guard established white shoe LA malpractice defense lawyer, kind of that cadre of lawyers. So he's the only guy I knew because I'd gone to USC football games with them all the way through law school. They were big USC people. And I said, hey, I called my friend. I said, hey, man, can your dad get me a job? He goes, oh, let me call him. And I knew he defended doctors and hospitals. That's about all I knew. And he called and said, well, his dad calls me and he says, and he's now deceased. And he calls me, so he can come work for me. Well, I was living in Belmont Shore and Long Beach and, living on the beach, having a great time. And I didn't have any money. I think I'd gone back to waiting tables, while I was waiting for bar results. And he says, well, come and work for me. Well, they were out in Pomona or Upland, and anybody knows anything about the geography of Southern California, that's a long way. And I didn't want to do that. And I said, well, do you know anybody closer to me? And he goes, well, I know a bunch of guys just splitting off from a big firm in Century City, and they're going to Manhattan Beach, and they're very busy. And then he got me an interview, and I got in there. And
was this Kajar's office?
Jim Kajar.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, so I got hired by Kajar, who's still a very dear friend.
I ride with Kajar.
Okay.
Yeah.
He's a very, very close friend of mine, and I worked for Kajar.
Yeah.
And so, who's one of the finest lawyers I've ever known and one of the best human beings in the world. And I was there a couple of years, I think, maybe 3. And then my first wife had got a job teaching up here. So I had to leave. I would have never left because I'm in Southern California, but
yeah, that's pretty idyllic being in Manhattan Beach. Yeah.
Well, and I was, I got there and I remember I was this, lower middle class, blue collar kid. I remember walking in there and the office was beautiful and Kajar's beautiful and everybody's beautiful. And I thought, I've died and gone to heaven. I've really made it. This is LA law, right?
I just remember because I used to read Verdict Search every week when it would come out in print because I wanted to see what results were like. And it was like it was the Reback, McAndrews, Kajar periodical because it was just defense verdict after defense verdict by that firm.
Yeah. So and it's funny is to this day, the firm's kind of broken up in a couple of pieces, but I'm still very close friends with most of those people. And I have cases against them occasionally. And I tell people all the time, and I've talked about mentoring and given presentations about it. they were so busy, I got thrown in. They didn't have to, I remember walking into my office and there's like 20,000 pages of subpoenaed medical records. And KJR walks in and says, summarize these. Well, I didn't know what the hell I was looking at. And so I remember sitting in my office for 2 weeks on a dictaphone, and then whatever the work product was, and he walks in my office, he goes, dude, I can't bill the client all this. And I said, dude, I don't know what I'm reading. And so they started, they would send me out to take expert depots as a 2-week lawyer. I didn't know what I was doing.
Did you have any sort of anatomy, medicine, anything in your background? Zero. Okay.
I think the extent of my science training was I took statistics in college to get out of math, and I think I might have had a really elementary physics class I had to take. But no, I had no scientific background, and they threw me in, and somehow I sucked it all up. And I give him and a lot of other people I worked with on the defense side credit for that. I think I had the kind of brain, I sucked things up. And I think that's a lesson for younger lawyers. Really embrace what you don't know. Sometimes you'll feel like you're inadequate or stupid, but you're not. You just got to learn, right? I mean, we have young lawyers that work for us that we really try to instill in them, hey, there's never a dumb question, because I asked a lot of them when I was a young lawyer, and you'd feel like you're this small, but it made you who you are. And so, it was a great way to learn, because I was at a firm that tried a lot of cases, had a lot of good clients. We had a lot of fun. I wouldn't trade it for the world.
What shifted? Because it's, again, you're no longer in Manhattan Beach. At some point,
So I needed a job. Yeah, I needed a job. So, and I didn't have time to look for a job. So this is back in the days when we all had those Martindale Hubble tech books, and you'd sit there and you'd go like by geographic area and a practice area, and you look, okay, well, that firm looks like they do this. And at the time when I came up here, or trying to come up here, the best firm in Northern California, probably north of Fresno all the way to the Oregon border, was a firm called Anderson, Galloway, and Lucchese. They were kind of the Reback, Holbert, McAndrews, and KJR of Northern California. And I got interviewed there, and I happened to get lucky enough to be assigned to the managing partner, I'm still very, very close. He was almost like a father figure to me to this day. And I worked with Pat Galloway for a number of years and learned how to be a great lawyer, and how to carry myself, and how to interrelate with people and treat people and think about cases. And so that was kind of the next step.
And then how long was it before you shifted over to the plaintiff side?
I would say it wasn't that long, maybe another 3 or 4 years, something like that. And then, it was funny. I working with Pat, I was exposed to kind of the biggest cases. So, we would get all the big stuff from UCSF and the big stuff from Stanford. And so, I would kind of be dealing with the Rich Schoenbergers and the Mike Kellys and the Paul Melodies and the Jim Boswicks. And so I kind of grew up practicing with and on the other side of those people, Cynthia McGuinn, those people. And I remember there was I don't know if he's still around, it was a guy named Gus von Bolschwing, who ran it was a third-party administrator, and they do stuff for Stanford, UCSF, USC, Keck, all that stuff. And he took a liking to me. And, and he basically ordered all the defense lawyers around, and he took a liking to me, and he used to tell me, boy, you'd make a really good plaintiff's lawyer. And I kind of kept it in the back of my mind, and I never really thought about why. And then I remember, having a bunch of cases with Jim Boswick, and he called me one day and said, hey, I want to talk to you. And I kind of talked to him and shrugged it off at first because I was so happy where I was. And then one day I didn't have kids and thought, if I'm going to make a big move, this would be the time to do it. And I did it and never looked back. And Pat was critical of me at first, but then we talked about it often, that it was a good move. But it was I was the first person that anybody kind of knew of in the malpractice bar that had done that up and down the state. Now it's kind of become more common, but yeah, that was kind of how that all evolved. I've always been in the malpractice world. I could probably count on one hand how many non-malpractice cases I've ever handled.
My guess is, given the Is decades an accurate description of the amount of time?
Decades.
Okay. The decades that you've been doing it, that the medicine has come to you because you work on a case that involves this and you learn it. Is that a yes, Mr. Mitchell?
Yes. Yes. Sorry.
No, I'm being silly in terms of deposition stuff. Along those lines, is it all sorts of different things, or have you ended up with kind of a total medical brain anatomical mastery? Or do you learn something and then dispose of it?
I have many faults, but one of them is not my memory. I have a photographic memory. It doesn't mean I'm smart. I just remember everything. It served me so well. And my brain over decades of doing this, I feel like I think like a physician. I'm looking at every case. The law and what I do is not very hard. Very simple. There's a couple of statutes you have to know. You have to know the evidence code, obviously, to try cases and all those sorts of things. But for some reason, I've just got this gestalt of I think through things like a physician. It's like an algorithm, decision tree. And I've had so many cases. I've had thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of cases. I've seen everything multiple times. And although, every time I say that, then something pops up. I go, wow, I never had that kind of case, right? We've all had that happen. And so my brain I don't know how it happened. I don't have a scientific brain per se, but I think over the years, I've just developed a way of thinking about medicine in these cases. And I see common themes and common errors and common, I can kind of categorize every case into different patterns of fault. And I think it's just because of reps, experience, and I have a good memory. I don't really know any other way to put it.
Well, not everyone here listening is going to be doing med mal. A
Sure.
lot of them are going to be dealing with anatomy.
Sure.
I think of myself as having a lot of understanding of joints and muscles and ligaments and brain
Sure.
as well. Different than, medical causation.
Sure.
In that regard, do you have any things that worked well for you as a younger lawyer to help you master this information? Were there places you went to? Was there a way that you learned the material?
Sure. Something I still do to this day. I was taught as a young lawyer, if you got a case involving, for example, there used to be a condition, there's still a condition called kernicterus, which is basically excess bilirubin builds up, and bilirubin is a toxin, it's a poison. And it builds up to such an extent, if it crosses the blood-brain barrier, it causes a lot of problems, i.e. blindness, deafness, brain damage, etc. And I remember as a young lawyer having a lot of those cases, and I would read everything about that condition. What the bilirubin levels were, why, phototherapy, transfusions, and I'd read the literature. I'd figure out who's writing the literature, reading what they're writing. So, even a dumb philosophy major, you read enough well-sourced material, you're going to get a pretty rudimentary, decent understanding of how the pathophysiology works and treatment works, et cetera. And so to this day, I do that on basically every case I work on. I see a ton of birth injury cases. I've had it, God knows how many in my career. I can read fetal monitoring strips, not like a perinatologist, but I can read them well enough to know if I have a good case or not. And so if I get any slightly esoteric area of medicine or treatment, because things change, as you know, all the time, I'm reading a lot. I spend a lot of time reading medical journals and I really dive into that stuff. And because this stuff in a lot, particularly in cancer cases and complex neurosurgery, et cetera, sometimes fetal surgery, these treatments are evolving rapidly. And we spend a lot of time reading the material. And so my advice to younger lawyers, even if you're not doing a med mal, if you have a bike case and somebody ends up having or auto case with an axonal injury, and read about it. If you've never had that case, read about it. There's so much great open source material. It doesn't cost a lot of money, and a lot of it's well written, and AI is helpful with that kind of stuff. My advice would be read, learn, suck it in.
In terms of open source material, where are you going? Are you going to PubMed, just straight Google? Where do you go when
All
you're
the
absorbing
above.
this? Okay.
I start on Google. I'll end up at PubMed. And we use a thing called Up to Date, which basically that's what nurses and doctors actually on hospital floors use when they need to look something up. It's called Up to Date. It basically breaks down a lot of things, particularly in clinical medicine, where it's well-sourced, evidence-based stuff. You buy a subscription, and we do that on every case. It's at least a tiny bit esoteric, or we might not know as much as we want to know. We go to sources like that. And, we really work hard as a law firm doing that.
Going back to your switch from defense to plaintiff, I think a lot of people think of a defense lawyer's job as poking holes and a plaintiff's lawyer job as putting the thing together. Or, if you were to do it as like a cops versus robbers, that, the robber has to come up with the heist and all the cop needs to do is come up with one way to tear it down.
Right.
How did you find the switch from defense lawyer mindset to plaintiff's lawyer mindset?
Surprisingly easy. And I think because I'm not saying it should be or always is, but I just think I was nurtured by such good lawyers on both sides. I frankly don't have a philosophical bent one way or another. I could turn around tomorrow and be just as effective as a defense lawyer as I am a plaintiff's lawyer. I treat their intellectual problems and problems to be solved. But that's exactly right. The defense lawyers in my line of work, they want to complicate everything. They'll take a very simple case and try to make it as complex as possible because juries, generally speaking, the more complex it is, the less likely it is for them to award your client money. Plaintiffs' lawyers, what we're trying to do is take something that's often very complex and make it simple and put it in a narrative, in a context that makes sense, that they can relate to it. So, but that switch wasn't that hard for me. And I just think because I was around such good lawyers on both sides, I was taught how to analyze a case and be an advocate. Because if you're a defense lawyer, to be an advocate, there's two parts: pure advocacy, and the other just as important part, and it's the same as what we're doing. You're a counselor. You're trying to mitigate risk. You're trying to advise your client. You're trying to assess the risk profile of a case. And so those are A, advocacy, and B, being a risk assessor. Those are kind of the tenets of what I think both sides do if they're effective.
Thank you for listening. And please join us next week as we continue this conversation. Like what you heard? Share us with a colleague and leave us a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. Please email us at podcast@kubris.law with questions, comments, feedback, and suggestions. To all of you doing justice out there, happy hunting.